history of this nation teaches us that in some of our darkest moments of despair, we've made some of our greatest progress.
Right, so the ad was released yesterday to ABC News, and essentially it's going to be released on online platforms in some critical swing states, including Wisconsin, Michigan, I believe Florida's on that list as well, and a number of others. And essentially, he was talking about the need to speak up, the need to have your voice heard. And I think that was definitely a direct appeal to protesters. And we see a lot of these protesters, not all, but quite a bit of them are younger people living in these bigger cities. And you're seeing them happening across the nation. So it was definitely an appeal to those young voters, young African-American voters as well. Remember, in the primary, while Joe Biden did very well with African Americans as a whole, he didn't do particularly well with younger African Americans. Younger African Americans typically appear to vote more for Bernie Sanders. He wants to energize that section of the voting bloc ahead of November. Joe Biden came out earlier this week against defunding the police, and you've seen a lot of other Democratic lawmakers do the same as well. He's walking a very fine line here because I think a lot of this is also generational. I haven't seen any specific polling on this, but in terms of police funding, I think you're seeing a lot more young, a lot of the voices for this movement do typically tend to be younger Americans. And, there are older Democratic voters that are a reliable voting bloc for the Democratic Party. So he's walking a very fine line.
It looks like young voters who are voters age is 18 to 34 just say they're ideologically more liberal than any other group, specifically economically and socially. They also see Joe Biden as less liberal than any other age group. I think only 40% of young voters call him very or somewhat liberal, compared to 62% of those who are 65 or older who call him liberal. A poll that we did in early this year in January with the Alliance for Youth Action showed that young voters vote for issues that they care about. 59% of young voters said the reason that they go vote when they vote is to support issues that they care about. And then 39% said it was to support candidates that they like. We can see right now with the protests that are going on, young people care deeply about criminal justice reform, about defunding the police, about these social issues that are happening in our country right now. And Joe Biden is speaking out on these things and addressing them. I think he just needs to do a better job of addressing them in the context of young voters. Young voters, and specifically young voters of color, don't trust the political system in this country, and that includes the way that we vote. They're very skeptical. They've grown up since the 2000 election, have understood that the popular vote doesn't necessarily translate to the person who's president. And so there's this deep distrust of the voting system that is going to need to be addressed and worked on in the future in order to increase turnout amongst young voters.